just long enough to let us in. We were trained fossil hunters, but now we would have to figure out how to become Arctic explorers.
So when the helicopter drops you off in the Arctic for the first time, you're standing here saying, what am I doing?
Doing something right. Yeah, he's doing something right. Now listen, here's the thing about research. These guys are living in these tents. They're getting up, working like 12-hour days maybe. Okay, chipping away, looking for fossils. A lot of people think like, oh, research, fine, archaeology. Then I watch Indiana Jones. What a exciting life. Look, it's hard work. And I always like it when kids like they say things like, oh, I really want to get into like, like maybe I want to be an environmental scientist. I want to look at some of the stuff. I'm like, awesome. They're like, well, what experience do you have? I was like, well, let me tell you about the last job I had. I was working with some researchers at the Indiana Dunes National Park, and we were looking at interdunal ponds. And we had to like get out of this bus, well, this is actually a van, and walk through poison ivy. Like it was like as high as my waist. I've never seen poison ivy like this in my life. And people were like, weren't you concerned? I was like, I don't know. We had a job to do. Didn't think about poison ivy. Also, we were working in ponds. I asked the guy, do I wear boots that day? He goes, no, wear Chuck Taylors. Okay, shoes that you lace up, and wear pants, not jeans, something that's going to like dry a little bit quicker. It's a little like lighter cotton pant. And he's like, and we'll bring the duct tape. I was like, well, what's the duct tape for? And he's like, well, where you're going to like take the duct tape and you're going to duct tape the bottom of your pant leg to your shoe. And I was like, why is that? And he's like, well, you don't want the leeches to crawl up your pants. And I was like, what do you mean leeches? He's like, oh, you'll see. Okay, we get in these ponds, like we're not wearing like any sort of like boots or anything. I'm literally wearing something like I've got on right now, except for duct tape around my legs. And the leeches were like this big. You see them swimming in the water. And we're trying to get pond core samples at the bottom of this pond by ramming this meter-long pipe into the bottom. Okay, one time we lost a piece. This girl, I had to dive down and get it. She came up, she was fine. About a half hour later, she's like, oh, something feels weird. She reached down her pants. A leech had gone down her shirt, down into her leg, and began sucking the blood. Took about 45 minutes for that blood to stop. Research is hard work. Can be a little exciting too, okay?
Here, you're thinking of polar bears. That's the first thing you look for. Is there anything on the landscape? Everything white becomes a polar bear. The last thing on your mind are fossils.
It's hard to believe when you look out across this frozen terrain that once this was a warm, watery world swimming with life.
Here we are in the Arctic, and we have a snowstorm coming, and we're looking at rocks behind us, but there's this huge disconnect between the present and the past. What we see today is a valley with red and green rocks that are tilted, stacked one on top of the other. But that's not how it was in the past. These valleys have been carved by glaciers that have moved back and forth. And those red and green rocks actually at one point extended across the valley. And they were straight, they weren't tilted. Now look inside the rocks, and what those rocks tell us, that this valley, 375 million years ago, was a giant floodplain. And that floodplain was filled with rivers that swelled their banks and sometimes shrunk, but in those conditions formed swamps and streams of all different sizes. And inside those streams was diverse life.
Nobody told me this stuff, right? When I was a kid and like when I was your age. In fact, I didn't learn this until, more recently. And I showed you this already, but like I'm fascinated by this. Okay, at Science Central, they've got this really cool globe, and they got this fun little Indiana there, and you could see where we were, like totally near almost the South Pole, but now then closer to the equator. So that means that even in that Canada region was underwater, okay, completely down here, where it was hot, warm, and where fish like the guy that we're looking for lived. Hey, why does anybody ever talk about that? You talk about Indiana being underwater, but nobody ever talks about the fact that it was way down here. Like, I mean, did you know that before this class? Yeah. Okay, cool, man. Maybe like teachers are like teaching that and stuff now. I sure didn't. Okay, so here we go.
somewhere out there, we were hoping to find an intrepid fish on the brink of the historic transition to life on land.
Savannah, put your phone.
Could we ever find evidence of this momentous event buried in sediments that have been crushed and distorted by 375 million years of geological upheaval?
When you think about everything that has to go right for a creature to be first a fossil, and then a creature's fossil to be discovered by a paleontologist, is like finding a needle in the haystack.
Literally, what are you doing? Just chipping away at this rock, trying to find any sort of evidence. Crazy.
We were determined to find that needle, if it was out there.
All right, now I'm going to jump ahead for just a second. All right, now he's going to talk a little bit about embryos, okay? And I want you
Side by side.
I want you to look at this. I wish I would have, like, if I could go back and say, Neil, make this movie just a little bit different, okay? This is going to have a word pop up here, but I wish this word wasn't there. All right, so this is a fish embryo, okay? What embryo do you think this is? Seahorse, alligator, great. And the other guess is?
Human.
Side, you'll see something.
You're right, okay?
I'm a genius.
That's every single one of you at about 2 weeks look like this, okay? That's you, okay? Okay, I liked your guesses. I liked your guesses a lot, right? I would have guessed the same, not human by any means.
Remarkable. They look almost identical. We really do look like fish. Both embryos have a head, a body, a tail, and many other similar features.
And one of those similarities exists in the neck, or what's called the pharyngeal area.
In both fish and people, what you find are a series of swellings called gill arches.
It turns out that in fish, those swellings become components of the gill apparatus.
But for us,
People, they become portions of our lower jaw, portions of our middle ear, part of our voice box.
okay, and then that's how Lucas Popey's sister as a whole, right there in her ear, just like
Can you
that.
seriously like breathe underwater if you have one?
No, unfortunately not.
What? Come on.
I know,
That's so
right?
stupid.
I know.
To make an update on humans.
All right.
Yeah.
Now watch this.
I'm gonna be like Aquaman or something. Yeah. 2021. Speak to fish.
In July 2000, we were back in the Arctic for a second season,
Didn't find anything.
continuing the search
1999,
for our
nothing.
elusive fossil.
That's the thing. Sometimes you're like,
No, we're actually down float going down to this level, so let's just stay close.
We widened our explorations across the region, but we were finding hardly anything, let alone the transitional fossil of our dreams. Then, just before we began to pull out, we were suddenly confronted with the real dangers of working in this wilderness.
The team had separated into several different groups. We usually go out in pairs because it's a dangerous place. One pair went down the valley, another one up the valley, and we spread apart for the day. This is Bird Keyword. This is
okay, we're
Bird.
missing somebody
We
close.
all
Watch
return
this.
at the end of the day. The idea is that everybody needs to return back to camp by radio call at 7 o'clock when we make our safety check back to the station. And so we're making dinner and we're waiting for the radio call. And, hey, you guys see Jason? No, I see Jason. You see Jason? I asked you that question. You see Jason? All of a sudden, became nobody saw Jason. Where's Jason? This is our youngest member. We were looking out for him the entire season, and no Jason. I mean, my heart was really beginning to race. I hear footsteps outside the tent. Tent fly opens. There's Jason. His eyes are
Let's go, dude. Jason.
like glows. And he's like, I found it. I found it. Jason, did you find a polar bear? What? I mean, every pocket was burgeoning with bones. So I got these bones. He's laying them out on the table one after another. It's daylight 24 hours a day. So we ran down.
Daylight's 24 hours a day.
And that night to crawl it, looking for the layer that was kicking out the bones. As soon as we came to this bluff here and looked down, we saw why Jason was so excited. Because beneath our feet were fossil fish bones, fragments of fossil fish, many of them, thousands of them. It wasn't just one fish, it was a whole aquarium. It was different species. It got better because as we walked up the hill and we followed that carpet of fossil fragments, it stopped, meaning it likely came from one layer. And if we had any luck at all, we'd find that layer and see what's inside. But there was this here.
It took several weeks, but we eventually located the layer of rock from which the fossil fragments were spilling, and then looked for telltale signs of bones protruding, in the hope it might lead us to more complete specimens.
You can see this tiniest little white
Okay,
fleck here.
now I've seen, so if you're ever interested in archaeology, and back in the 80s, it was a really like, it was kind of like the, you know, like how people like are like all of a sudden like, oh, I want to do this. Like for like in.
Yeah, you're the one.
I could be a band too.